"I heard you're not one of us," my aunt said, with a smile that cut. "My name is Naomi Kershaw. I grew up in a river town where the hills hold fog-like secrets, and family names matter more than the work of your hands." My mother taught piano from our living room, steady as rain on a tin roof, and she rarely spoke of my father. When I asked, she said he had a sailor's heart and a map that never stopped moving. I learned to live with the ache. I learned to keep quiet. My Aunt Ruth ran the world inside our family, or she liked to believe she did. Her voice carried through every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every text that told us who brought dessert and who brought silence. She loved rules, and she loved the tight feeling of them. She would pass cranberry sauce like a crown, then hold court with questions that were meant to wound. The first wound landed at my grandmother's funeral, while sunlight fell in gold sheets over the casket lid. I stood beside the lilies and tried to remember a lullaby, something pure enough for goodbye. Ruth stepped close, too close, her perfume sharp as a bell. "This is for immediate family," she said, steady and cold. "You may sit with the cousins in the second row." I kept my breath even, hands still on the program. "I am her granddaughter," I said, the word small, but intact. Ruth's mouth lifted. "You're Maureen's girl, not my brother's. Everyone knows that." She tilted her head toward the front row, where my uncles bowed their heads. "Second row will be fine." I sat among the cousins and watched the first row like a locked door. The pastor spoke of mercy and the work of small kindnesses, the choir rose, people wept in quiet heaves. I pressed my fingers against the program until the paper bent, then smoothed it again, imagining my grandmother's hands on mine. I remembered her quilting frame, the hush of her breath while she threaded needles, the story she once started and never finished, about a supper no one else remembered and a promise that tasted like winter apples. When the pallbearers lifted the casket, I stood with the cousins as instructed. Ruth did not look back. After the burial, the reception unfurled in the church basement, where coffee smelled tired and the pies lined up like soldiers. Ruth moved from table to table, a quiet storm with a plate. When she reached me, she set down a slice of pecan pie and said, too loudly, "It takes more than a last name to be family." People went silent, forks hovering over paper plates. I felt heat rise and settle, then cool into something precise. I nodded once, and my voice surprised me. "You're right," I said. "It takes love, and memory, and proof." Her eyes flashed with the last word. Proof. There it was, the first spark catching dry leaves. I did not argue. I did not plead. I gathered the plates from our table, stacked them neatly, and tied off a bag of napkins. Quiet hands can be sharper than voices. The room breathed again. That night, while the river carried moonlight in a silver seam, I wrote in my mother's old ledger. A list of names, a list of losses, a list of things I could not forget. At the bottom, I wrote a single line, more intention than plan. If she wants proof, I will find it. The fog settled against the window, the kind that blurs the world until only outlines remain. I remembered my grandmother's half-finished story, the promise beneath it, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something steadier. The start of a map, and the courage to read it. The winter after the funeral moved as slowly as a bruise fading. At gatherings, Ruth decided where I stood and what I was called. She greeted me as Maureen's charity, then laughed like it was a joke everyone had agreed to understand. People watched her do it, then studied the floor. I learned the choreography of being misplaced, one careful step behind belonging. At Christmas, she distributed stockings in her living room, the tree so well trimmed it felt rehearsed. Names written in glitter, hung in a perfect red line. Mine waited on a side table, unmarked, a spare for last-minute guests. I lifted it gently, I filled it with clementines and a paperback I brought for myself. Ruth saw, and the corner of her mouth curled. Traditions matter, she said, pouring cider without looking at me. So does kindness, my mother said, surprised at the edge in her voice. Ruth held the cider pitcher midair, then set it down with ceremony. Kin must be kept in order, she replied. Lines hold us together. The room went thin. I folded my hands and waited for the shape of my anger to reveal itself, not as fire, but as a key cut to a very particular door. I wanted to walk through that door without breaking it, to leave it standing behind me with a clean hinge. After New Year's, I stopped attending dinners. I told my mother I needed time to breathe, and she understood. I spent my evenings at the library, where the heat clicked in the radiators and the windows held the streetlight like a soft coin. I read about inheritance laws, about birth records, about the mathematics of kinship. I did not know exactly what I was looking for, only that I would know it by the way it steadied my hands. One late afternoon, I found a box in our attic labeled Sheets. Inside were letters wrapped in tissue. The top envelope held my grandmother's careful hand, the addresses looping like vines. I read until the edges of the paper warmed to my skin. There were recipes, reading lists, notes from church, nothing that would open any door. At the very bottom, folded so small it looked like an apology, sat a slip of paper with a phone number and 3 words, for the truth. I carried the slip to the kitchen and set it by the tea kettle. I stared at the numbers while the kettle sang. The first ring ended, the second lingered, the third finally opened into a voice. Verity Clinic, a woman said, smooth as the name. I listened to myself ask about their services, my voice low but unshaking. She told me what they did, how they handled chain of custody, how the results were delivered by courier with a signature required. She explained price, timelines, the steps we would need to take if any party refused. Her words felt like stepping stones, practical and cold, arranged across water. The next week, I collected the kit, paid in full, and scheduled the first appointment. My mother came with me, her fingers steady on a pen while she signed. She traced her signature as if it were a prayer. When the nurse swabbed my cheek, I felt foolish for having imagined something grand, some lightning strike of fate. It was a soft brush, a small thing placed in vials, labeled, sealed, handled with care that felt almost tender. Truth, as it turned out, did not need drama, only patience. I mailed a second kit to Ruth with a registered letter, a copy to each uncle. The letter said only what was required, that the clinic would call for scheduling, that participating would resolve an old question. I did not add threats, I did not add pleas. My return address looked plain in the corner, a square of ink that told everyone where to send their disbelief. Days passed with the soft persistence of February. Ruth did not answer the clinic's first call. She missed the second. On the third, she picked up, then scheduled for the last available slot of the last available day. I learned this from the clinic's coordinator, who never once raised her voice, who understood that the shape of truth often includes delay. On the evening before Ruth's appointment, the river lifted fog again, a slow drift through the oaks. I stood on our back steps until my coat could not hold the cold. I thought about the ledger, the line I wrote there, the way a promise anchors time. I returned inside, washed my hands, and sharpened a pencil. I wrote a second line under the first. I will carry proof to her door, and I will lay it down gently. The call came on a Wednesday, a small sound in a quiet room. I was grating assays at the kitchen table, the steam from my tea low and steady. The clinic coordinator introduced herself again, careful and professional, then asked if I had a moment to talk about the results. She spoke as if placing a glass on a table, clearly and without spill. We have a conclusive match, she said. The probability is beyond dispute under our thresholds. I thanked her. She explained how they would release the report, how a courier would deliver sealed packets to each consenting party, how my copy would arrive by noon. She offered to answer questions, and I asked none. When the line clicked off, The room felt larger, as if the door I had been standing before had opened to a hallway filled with light. I sat very still and listened to the clock. At 12, a man in a navy jacket rang the bell and handed me a thick envelope that made a dry sound against my palm. I signed with a pen I had placed by the door that morning, then carried the envelope to the table. I did not tear it open. I used a letter opener my grandmother once owned, a brass leaf with a spine, and slid it under the flap. The paper yielded with a hushed release. The report was 12 pages, tabbed and initialed, thick with methodology, gentle with conclusions. My eyes found the words that mattered: biological relationship consistent with aunt-niece, paternity confirmed through the tested relatives, confidence interval exceeds 99.9%. I felt neither vindication nor triumph, only a loosening, something untying itself inside the chest. I touched the heading with one finger, then set the report back into its folder. In the afternoon, I called Aaron Patel, a lawyer who lived 3 houses down. He had taught me to ride a bike when I was 8, jogging behind the seat until I stopped wobbling. He answered on the first ring, the sound of his dog shaking in the background. "I need an education in careful letters," I said, then told him everything. I told him about Ruth at the funeral, about the stockings, about the ledger line and the soft brush of the swab. He listened the way good people do, without interrupting the parts that hurt most. "That report is a key," he said when I finished. "It opens doors, but we decide which ones." "What do you want, Naomi, exactly?" I looked at the river through the window, the way it allowed everything to pass and still kept its shape. "I want to stop being a rumor," I said. "I want to be allowed to be myself, without debate." He exhaled, the sound like relief. "Then we will write a letter that is not a weapon," he said. "We will write one that is a mirror." We worked at his dining table, the dog asleep at my feet, the light moving across the wood. Aaron drafted sentences that carried weight without weightiness. He invoked the report, acknowledged family history, requested correction of a public wrong. He suggested a gathering at the community hall where we had always celebrated births and mourned losses, a place with folding chairs that were impartial. "Invite everyone," he said. "Offer them coffee, offer them space. Do not offer an argument." We printed the letter on heavy paper. He sealed each envelope with a sticker shaped like a small gold duck, clean and ordinary. I carried the stack home and placed them in the blue mailbox by the curb, the way one places seeds into ordinary soil. The wind lifted for a moment, enough to move hair across my cheek. On Friday, the courier would visit Ruth with her packet. On Saturday, we would open the doors to the hall. I spent the evening at my mother's piano, playing scales like prayer. When my fingers stumbled, I let them, then began again. The house felt settled, the air even. The report lay in a folder on my desk, and it no longer felt like proof to wield, but a simple description of what had been true all along. I did not sleep much, but the hours were calm. When morning came, I rose to a sky the color of clean sheets, and I brewed strong coffee. The ledger on my nightstand held 2 lines, now joined by a third I wrote before dawn. "Bring the truth into a room, let it stand on its own legs." The community hall smelled like floor wax and coffee, familiar and plain. We set out chairs in even rows, left a wide aisle in the middle, and arranged a table near the front with cups, napkins, and a single vase of winter branches. The river ran beyond the windows, low and patient. By 10, people began to arrive, carrying casseroles and cautious faces. Aaron stood near the door, greeting everyone with the same short nod. My mother arranged cookies on plates, her hands certain. I stood by the window and let the room fill. When Ruth walked in, the air shifted by an inch. She wore a navy coat and a careful expression, and she held the sealed packet at her side like a clutch. She did not greet me. She took a front row seat as if it were owed, placed the packet on her lap, and folded her hands. My uncle sat near her, shoulders tight. Cousins chose the second and third rows without instruction, a habit long formed. I walked to the front, the sound of my shoes steady. I did not ask for silence, the room gave it. I thanked everyone for coming, and I thanked Aaron for arranging the space. I said we were there not to stage a trial, but to release a story from the teeth of rumor. I said there were copies of a report for anyone who wanted to read one in their own time. I did not say the word aunt. I did not say the word apology. Aaron lifted the folder and set it on the table with the branches. These are the reports from the clinic, he said, voice level. You may take one, or not. There is coffee either way. Ruth stood, her packet unopened. This is highly irregular, she said. Families do not solve their problems in public. My hand stayed still on the podium. Ruth, I said, using her name like a starched napkin. You made your statements in public places. You set me in the second row, you labeled me as other in rooms we shared. I am returning your words to the same air where you put them. Her mouth flattened. She lifted the packet an inch, then held it there, undecided. My mother rose from her chair and walked to the table. She took a report, placed it in front of Ruth, and returned to her seat without a word. Ruth looked at the cover. She slid a finger under the seal, careful and slow, as if folding a dress. The paper released with a faint tear. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes lifted, then fell again. She did not rush. When she finished, she placed the report back on her lap and smoothed the edge with her palm. This proves a biological fact, she said, finally. It does not prove character. I nodded once. No report can do that, I said. Character reveals itself over time. A low murmur moved through the room, not unkind. My Uncle Daniel stood. Ruth, he said quietly, you went too far. She did not look at him. She stared at the branches on the table as if they might bloom under pressure. I exhaled and felt something loosen that had been tight for years. There was no triumph in it, only a clean click. I am not here to win, I said to the room. I am here to live without the weight of your doubt. I am here to stop the small cuts and the silent seats. Ruth's shoulders dropped by a fraction. And what do you expect now? She asked, voice thin. Nothing from you, I said. Only the space you kept for yourself. I will take up my share of the row. Silence laid itself across us like a white cloth. No one rushed to fill it. Aaron poured coffee. My mother passed plates. A cousin picked up a chair and moved it to make room for another. Ruth stayed seated, the report on her lap, the seal opened like an eye. She did not ask for forgiveness, and I did not offer it. One by one, people approached the table, took copies, or chose not to. No arguments rose, no voices chased the ceiling. The truth stood where we had placed it, in a simple folder with metal fasteners. The room, relieved of its secret, breathed differently. Outside, a heron moved slow across the water, long legs finding a quiet path. When we ended, it felt like the way good music lands, not with a flourish, but with a note that is exactly enough. I stacked the extra reports, aligned their edges, and placed them in the box. Ruth walked past me as she left, eyes steady, mouth unreadable. She did not touch my arm, she did not look at the floor. She carried the report like a book she had finished, knowing it would not change as she reread it. Justice, in that hall, did not shout. It arrived, sat where it needed to, and did not move. Spring came in small permissions, tiny leaves loosening and light lengthening on the river. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, and I learned to bake a loaf that rose reliably. My mother's piano grew warm again with scales and small songs, the kind she used to teach children who kicked their feet under the bench. The ledger on my nightstand remained open to the page with 3 lines. I did not add a fourth. The promise had become a practice. I saw Ruth twice in April, once at the grocery store and once on the sidewalk near the post office. Both times, she did not cross the street. She nodded, and I nodded back, two travelers acknowledging the same map. The second time, she held her shopping list on a small clipboard, items neatly crossed in pencil. She paused, as if listening to a conversation only she could hear, then said, "The hall was well arranged." "Thank you," I said. It was not a beginning, yet it was not a refusal either. We both understood that some doors should remain on their hinges, open enough for air, closed enough to keep the house warm. Word moved slowly through the family. The cousins texted less about drama, more about movies and the weather and the stray cat that decided to sleep on Aunt Lena's porch. My Uncle Daniel asked if I would help him repair his fence. We spent a Saturday afternoon replacing boards, the sun on our backs, the hammer's rhythm steady and good. At lunch, he looked at me and said, "I wanted to say it then, and I will say it now. I am sorry." "I accept," I said, because acceptance can be unadorned and still be true. I began to attend gatherings again, on my own terms. I arrived with a salad and a blue bowl, I took a seat without asking, and I laughed when something was genuinely funny. I brought the piano bench forward once and accompanied the cousins singing a birthday song that landed sweetly off-key. I noticed how quickly rooms adjust to new shapes when they are not forced, how the second row stops existing when no one names it. A month after the hall, a thick envelope arrived from the law office that had managed my grandmother's will. The letter inside was brief and careful. A small account, overlooked during probate, had been discovered. The beneficiary listed was "my second son's child," a clear phrase that once floated, now anchored. The amount was not large, yet it felt like a restored syllable, the sound a name makes when it returns to the mouth that spoke it first. I opened a savings account in my name only, and I wrote, "for the house," in the memo line whenever I added to it. Not a grand house, not a house for proving anything, just a small place with enough light for herbs and a room for a second-hand piano. When an ache flickered, I played the measures that settle my breathing, 5 notes up, 5 notes down, the quiet arithmetic of peace. Aaron came by one evening with his dog, and we ate soup from deep bowls. "How does it feel," he asked, "to have the truth placed where it belongs?" "It feels like the morning after a storm," I said. "Not a clearing, exactly. More like the field understands itself again." He grinned at that. "You're good at plain words that land right," he said. "I had a good editor," I replied, and we lifted our spoons again. In June, I returned to the cemetery alone. The air smelled like cut grass and dryer sheets from a house down the hill. I stood beside my grandmother's stone and told her everything. I spoke about the hall and the folder and the way the river kept its shape. I told her about the account, and about the fence boards, and about the second row that no longer existed. I placed a sprig of rosemary on the grass, the scent rising clean and strong. "I kept the promise," I said. "I made room for the truth, and I let it do what it does." A breeze lifted the rosemary, then set it down again, as if agreeing. I closed my eyes and saw my grandmother at her quilting frame, small stitches making a hole. I thought of Ruth smoothing the edge of the report on her lap, a gesture that held both refusal and respect. The world rarely gives us final scenes, but it gives us enough beautiful partials to keep walking. Now, when people ask about family, I do not rush. I say my mother teaches piano, and my aunt keeps lists on a clipboard, and my uncles know how to straighten a fence. I say I am a granddaughter and a niece and a woman whose name belongs to her without permission from anyone else. I mention the river, because it matters, the way it accepts each season without complaint and still chooses its own pace. In the mornings, I open the kitchen window and let the air in. I water the basil and the thyme. I run my fingertips over the leaves because touch is a language too. Then I sit at the piano and play scales that never ask to be applauded, scales that simply strengthen the hands. This is the quiet after, not empty, but richly ordinary. The ledger remains on the nightstand, and I keep it there not to track offenses, but to remember the shape a promise can take. If you are listening, and you carry your proof in a folder or a memory, I hope you find a room where truth can stand without armor. I hope you learn the strength of a calm voice, the dignity of a chair chosen without asking. I hope your river keeps its shape while it carries you forward. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.